Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope all of you are doing good. So in the middle of a busy week, but I'm going to take some time out to share the part 2 of my review between the G60 5G and the Nokia X30 5G. Now I do hope you have watched my previous video on the first part of the comparison where everything doesn't seem as it is, because although the G60 5G is priced much cheaper than the Nokia X30 5G, it does excel in certain areas which actually matters this time. So it is not as easy as to recommend one over the other. Both these devices have their own unique properties which might entice buyers. So with that said, in this part 2 of the review, we're going to look at the camera performances on both these devices. So the G60 5G has a primary 50 megapixel sensor along with a 5 megapixel ultra wide and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. The front facing camera is at 8 megapixel count. Whereas on the X30 it only has a 50 megapixel primary sensor along with a 13 megapixel ultra wide and a front 16 megapixel camera sensor on board. Now with that said, the sensor that is being used on the Nokia X30 5G. Now this is a very interesting sensor, because outright you can see that the sensor is of a different category altogether. This is a more premium sensor that has been used, probably the most premium sensor which Nokia has used till date. Now what's interesting here is that this is the first pure view setup with optical image stabilization under HMD's direction. The last device that had this was the Lumia 950 series. So I've made a separate article and even video saying the probably the benefits and the advantages between pixel binning alone and optical image stabilization sensors. So the OIS and whether pixel binning alone along with electrical stabilization, this is sort of the argument we had, or the discussion that we had before. But now we seeing that it's making a comeback. So how much of the OIS would actually have any added advantage here? Now the pixel size on the primary sensor here is larger, is at least at 1 micron compared to the one on the G60, which is at 0.7. Now this is a quad binning sensor here, so 50 megapixel sensor on both these devices would actually translate to a 12.5 megapixel output. So in theory, pixel binning will allow more light to go in, so you have brighter images compared to your standard RGB sensors. Now optical image stabilized sensor would allow more light to come in, so images will be much more brighter than those with the OIS. And OIS also helps to sort of counter the minor jittery movements from your hand, especially when you do video recording, to give you a much stable video recording. Now these days, a lot of manufacturers, a lot of the sensors these days, they opt for quad binning technology alone to have brighter images, along with much newer image processing algorithms, along with electrical image stabilization to have the more stable video output. So it's quite interesting to see how the X30 performs compared to the Nokia G60 5G. So with that said, I'm going to share some of the images that I've took with both these devices, and I'm going to share you my opinion. I'm not a professional photographer, I'm just a regular Nokia phone user. So this is my own opinion, my own observation from both these devices. I do hope you enjoy this comparison that I'm going to show in a while.
Hello everyone. So this is going to be the comparison between the Nokia X30 5G, which is on the left hand side of the screen, compared to the Nokia G60 5G, which is on the right hand side of the screen. So this is going to be a comparison, and I'm going to give you an analysis based on my observation. So just a disclaimer, I am not a professional photographer, but I have been using Nokia device as my primary to-go camera device for many years now. So I do note on the different trends and improvement along the way. So this is going to be slightly subjective, but do bear with me. So we're going to kickstart the comparison with the primary camera on both these devices. So the observation that you can see from the first image, so the actual scene was actually an indoor low light scene, but this is just captured with the primary camera under standard photo mode. So you can see a couple of differences here. Now the first observation that is very apparent with the Nokia X30, especially when it comes to daylight photography, meaning you do not employ the night mode, what you will notice is that image tends to be on the warmer side. So this is similar to how the Lumia 950 series were tuned to. So in this actual situation or the scene, the Nokia G60 5G is able to capture the tone more accurately here. Now, one observation that I made using the Nokia G60 5G is that the output of the camera tends to be very much dependent on the available light in the environment. So what does this mean is that when you have adequate lighting, then the camera tends to perform well, and this is actually true for many mid-range sensors out there. So what I'm trying to say is that under good lighting condition, the G60 captures very good image with very much less noise, and there's not much of sharpening going on both these devices. But when the light or the sources of the light gets less, then the Nokia G60 5G tends to struggle a bit when it comes to the focusing, when it comes to the amount of noise that is available. So of course you won't be using the standard mode when it comes to low light situation. This is where you will actually use the night mode and you will have much better outcome. So I'm going to just zoom in both these images here to give an idea on how both these devices perform. Now what you can see is that the Nokia X30 5G, which is on the left hand side of the screen, has a much better natural bokeh effect compared to the one on the G60 5G. So for those of you who prefer to have natural bokeh, then the Nokia X30 definitely does that good because of the size of the sensor. And the other thing to take notice is that the Nokia X30 sensor is a more premium camera sensor. Someone said that this is the same sensor used in the Galaxy S22 setup. Now what I do notice is that this sensor is typically much brighter on the Nokia X30 compared to the Nokia G60, and the other observation is that this brightness is independent of the software algorithm that is being used, because the sensor naturally allows much more light to enter by default. So it has a lot of advantage compared to the Nokia G60 5G, where the sensor is not as premium as the one on the X30. So with both these images, you can see that under bright lighting situation, hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope all of you are doing good. So this is going to be a camera comparison between the Nokia X30 5G, which is on the left hand side of the screen, compared to the Nokia G60 5G on the right hand side of the screen. So in this comparison, I will be narrating my own personal observation after using both these devices. So this is going to be slightly different than my previous comparison, where I just put the image and it's out for the interpretation of the viewers. So of course, do bear with me, this is my own subjective opinion on both these cameras, and I'm just going to show or share with you my findings here. Now in this first photo sample, this is an indoor setting, so the lights are actually much less and slightly dim. In a couple of observations that I've made with the cameras on both these devices, so both of them are sporting a primary 50 megapixel sensor, and according to a couple of reviewers out there, the Nokia X30 has a much more premium sensor, something the line of the S22 series from Samsung, whereas the sensor used on the Nokia G60 5G, I can't really verify the type of sensor that is being used and the quality, but do take note that the Nokia X30 sensor is inherently much brighter by default. So it has a lot of advantage when it comes to low light performance, because it is already absorbing so much of light thanks to the camera sensor that is being used, and the software just fine tunes the output further. Whereas on the Nokia G60 5G, you can actually see that the sensor does struggle a bit with under low light condition, and it relies more on the software side to actually improve the outcome. So in this first scene that I want to share, this is actually captured through the primary sensor, the 50 megapixel sensor under standard photo settings. This is not night mode. So just to show you what I'm trying to say, that the Nokia G60 5G under low light, it's better to employ the night mode, so you get a better outcome. Otherwise you will see more noise in the image. So in situation where you have adequate lighting like this, then the outcome may not be that much of different between both these devices. Now the Nokia X30, you can see that it has much warmer tone. If you were to observe here, which is much more apparent, you can see that the Nokia X30 tends to be much more warmer by default. And this is true especially for their daylight imaging. The low light, on the other hand, is pretty fantastic, but when it comes to daylight imaging, some of you may not prefer the much warmer tone. Of course, you can do this, some editing, to get to a more natural outcome, but when it comes to tone, I do believe that the Nokia G60 5G has a much better reproduction of the actual scene. Now the other thing to take notice is the natural bokeh effect. The Nokia G60 and the Nokia X30 has both a 50 megapixel sensor, but the pixel size on the X30 is actually slightly larger at 1 micron compared to the G60 at 0.7 microns. But you can see that the differences in the natural bokeh effect, the X30 has a much more better natural bokeh effect compared to the Nokia G60 5G, despite both having a similar sensor. So I would say that I would prefer this because the natural bokeh effect is something that mimics, or no, this is actually something that is close to how a full-fledged camera would be when it comes to blurring of the foreground and the background. And this is slightly different from the AI portrait mode, where scenes has to be detected, the object has to be detected, and you might not get the more beautiful bokeh effect from the portrait mode. So for those of you who wants natural bokeh effect, probably the X30 would be a much better choice here. When it comes to details, like I said, these are captured through the primary sensors under standard photo condition. You can see that the amount of details on both these outputs are actually pretty good, and I won't say one is better than the other here. Both actually did pretty good. So I'm just going to move on to the next sample. So I'm going to go to this second image here. Now this is where things are a bit baffling with the Nokia X30 5G. Now you can see a lot of this light reflection on the Nokia X30 5G, and it's also present somewhere here, and you don't see it on the Nokia G60 5G. Now what I'm trying to say is that these flares from the light are very much well contained on the G60, and I don't have any smudges on my lens on the X30. This is how it is in all the daylight images under standard mode. So I'm not using night mode here, just this is through just the standard photo mode, and you can see that this is something that is present in all the images, and I'm not really sure if this is something that can be fixed through some software update, or if this is something related to the Gorilla Glass DX coating that was used. I'm just speculating it. So if it's software, I do hope that Nokia take notes of this and probably do something to improve the output. Now the main purpose of this image is not just to show you the glare on the Nokia X30. Like I said, both these devices have beautiful details captured. When you zoom in, you can see the amount of details are preserved, very much less noise on both these devices. But what I'm trying to show you is this, a very different color output. Now again, the Nokia X30 on the left hand side, and this is the Nokia G60. The actual color is the one that is captured by the Nokia G60. Nokia X30 inherently has a much warmer tone, and it also messes up with the color reproduction, which is something I did not expect from a pure view setup. This is of course software based, and there are high chances that Nokia or HMD Global could rectify this issue. And even if you were to see the ceiling here, the ceiling is actually supposedly black as it is here, but it tends to be slightly much more faded, washed out on the X30. So this is something to take note of. Now I'm going to go to the next sample. Let's see if we have just going to click this out. Alright, so here is another sample to show how washed out the color can be on the Nokia X30, where the wall here appears slightly more oranges, whereas on the G60 it is pinkish. So the actual color is what is being captured by the Nokia G60, and the Nokia X30 actually messes it up, though having a much sharper output in this particular situation. Next, we're going to look at the front-facing camera. So I'm just going to see, yep, so this is the AI portrait mode. Now, for those of you who have followed my previous review on the Nokia G60, then I have stated that the Nokia G60 has the best portrait mode on any Nokia devices till date. That is until I reviewed the Nokia X30. Now, it is an easy win for the Nokia G60 over any previous Nokia devices out there. This includes much more expensive devices like the Nokia X20, XR20, and even the Nokia 8.3. The thing about the Nokia G60 is that it's not just how the blur is much more beautiful, though it is nowhere near a full-fledged camera's blurring effect, but in terms of color reproduction, the tone, and as well as the details, this is something that the Nokia G60 5G does very good compared to previous devices like the Nokia 8.3, where it tends to have a much higher contrast, a lot of aggressive sharpening of the foreground subject, and a lot of noise in the images, which makes it not really usable, especially under low light situation. So this is again an indoor capture, and while both devices have taken a very good AI enhanced portrait effect here, I would say that the winner is clearly the Nokia X30. Now do take note that the Nokia X30 has an 16 megapixel sensor compared to the Nokia G60, which has half the megapixel count. So you can see when I zoom into the details, actually they are pretty much good. Both these devices actually good, but you can see these fine wrinkles on my forehead, which is slightly smoothened out on the Nokia G60. When it comes to color, the Nokia X30 nails the color much more correctly compared to the G60 here. But do take note that the G60 is already having one of the best portrait mode on any Nokia devices, so it is actually not bad at all. So upon further close-up images, again you can see this is an indoor low light through the primary sensor. You can see how much more aggressive the bokeh effect is on the X30 compared to the Nokia J60 5G. And under good lighting condition, actually under bright light, you would see that the amount of details captured on both these devices are actually good. Now this is another sample just to show you that the light flares are consistent on the X30, whereas on the G60 it is able to contain a lot of these flares, so you've got a much beautiful output through the primary sensor. But another thing to take note is that, like I said, as the amount of natural light gets less for the Nokia G60, it tends to have much more noise, whereas on the X30 the sensor is inherently brighter, and with the presence of OIS and whatnot, it's able to absorb more light at any given time compared to the Nokia G60. And again, the stark difference between the color of the wall here and the ones on the G60, where the G60 has a much better reproduction of the actual scene compared to X30, which appears to be more washed out in most situations. So again, just to show you that under low light situation, though both devices capture adequate amount of detail, you would see that the X30 has sharper image compared to the one on the G60, and of course again the more beautiful bokeh effect compared to the one on the G60. The differences become very much less under better lighting situation, and of course you can always use the night mode to have a much better output on both these devices. So again, this is a close-up image of the light here. You can see how the Nokia X30, though the Nokia G60, though having this flash captured, it is actually much less compared to the one on the X30. You can see more flash around the Nokia X30 around here, which is not present on the G60. So like I said, these are not smudges on the lens, but it's just that the Nokia X30 has a lot of this light flash, which could be related either to the sensor being used or to the DX coating. I do hope there could be some software update to rectify it. And again, you can see the same theme that I'm trying to emphasize, that the color reproduction on both these devices are different. The more accurate one in this situation is the G60. Now next is we're going to go into the night mode. Now the Nokia X30 hands down has the best night mode on any Nokia devices. The previous champion would be the Nokia 8.3. Of course, I'm going to make a detailed comparison between both these devices, as well with Nokia 9 PureView, to compare all the devices under HMD Global with PureView branding, and that is for a later comparison. But let's take a look at both these images. So the Nokia X30 is on the left, the Nokia G60 is on the right. Now, if you've watched my previous comparison between the Nokia 8.3 and the Vivo X70 Pro Plus, especially in low light, you will see that the Nokia 8.3 struggles to contain the highlight, especially from the neon lights here, where it just turns out to be a splotch of light. But on the G60, it is able to capture the individual words, it is able to capture the details and contain the lights, especially from neon lights. And this is something very commendable for G60 being somewhat targeted for a much cheaper mid-range device. Now, I would say that of course you will see much more noise on the Nokia G60 compared to the Nokia X30. The Nokia X30 simply does a much better job, and you can see that it has much better preserved details even under low light situation. This is thanks to the sensor being used as well as the software algorithm, whereas on the G60 it is heavily depending on the software to have the output. And you can even see the car number plates here. It is much more well defined on the X30 compared to the G60. You can even see the outline of the ground, which is much better contained and defined on the X30 compared to the G60. But in essence, both these devices have very good low light output, and it is something very much usable and with very less noise. So this is another sample to show you how different the outputs are on both these devices. And when it comes to the night mode, this is where it tends to reverse the standard mode on both these devices. You can see more noise on the G60. You can see that image tends to be slightly washed out on the G60 compared to the X30. For some reason, the Nokia X30 probably has a much more aggressive night mode, in a sense that it's not only capturing more lights, more details, but also the vibrancy is very much more compared to the Nokia G60. So I'm just going to show you a sample here. You can see how well it contains the light compared to the G60 here. And if we were to see the both this, if we were to concentrate on the leaves and the flowers here, you can see how much vibrant it is on the X30 compared to the Nokia G60 5G. So while this might not be the actual look that you captured, but this is something that I think everybody will be pleased with. Now you have a much beautiful low light image, and having the vibrancy boosted, especially for low light imaging, will definitely make the photo looks nicer. So when it comes to night mode, there is no comparison. The X30 is definitely the better device here. I'm just going to show you the same thing on this image. You can see that the leaves are very much well defined on the X30 compared to the G60. Actually, both devices do pretty good, but the X30 has a very much better and sharper output. You can even see the building on the back. You can see now, one thing commendable about the G60 is that it doesn't do aggressive sharpening, which we have seen in previous generations of Nokia devices, where there's a lot of artificial sharpening going on, which introduces a lot of noise. So the Nokia G60, be it daylight images or low light images, the amount of noise and sharpening is very much less, which makes the image looks pleasant. Of course, for those of you who wants to have an extra sharp image, would prefer sharpening, but for general usage, I think the G60 5G does very well in terms of having a much natural capture. So let's go to another sample here. Now this is again just to highlight that the vibrancy in low light capture on the X30, you can see how much vibrant it is. You can see the leaves, they just pop out on the X30 compared to the ones on G60. And of course, to be honest, this is not how it is actually is in real life, but having vibrant images in low light is one of the things that I really would love to see, because it makes the image look much more livelier. Because of all the low light algorithm, the night mode algorithm, things tend to be washed out in most of the images. This is irrespective of any brands out there, where once you start to soak in more light, things will tend to have much washed out effect, and it has to really depend on how much the algorithm can actually reproduce the color. And I would say that the ones on the G60 is much more accurate here, and on the X30 it is much more vibrant. And this is one situation where I would prefer to have much more vibrant image. Of course, this is on my personal opinion. So I do think that the X30 has a much more beautiful capture here. Everything about the images tends to be just better than the G60. You've got better details, you've got much less noise, you have much vibrant colors. All these are winning factors when it comes to low light images. You can see again the amount of detail that is being captured. Now this is something that is not just software dependent, but it's also hardware dependent, because the X30 sensor has OIS. It is a large sensor along with more low light centric features within the sensor itself, allowing it to capture more light. Now this is where the comparison becomes interesting. So in the previous G60 review, a lot of the Twitter feed that I have shared my images, where I shared the night mode and the dark vision. Now the night mode 2.0 introduces a new low light algorithm for both the G60 and the X30. It also introduces dark vision and tripod mode. On the G60, the dark vision simply just allows you to see more, but the images tend to be much noisier. It also tends to have a much less better containment of low light. In terms of lights, they can contain the lights much better. And I would say that while you might be able to see more, but you might not be able to use the image. And a couple of users out there have pointed out that the situation where I use the dark vision might not be the best. So what I tried to emphasize back then is that you could see more with dark vision, but you might not be able to use the image. So this is akin to having a 2 megapixel macro camera or a 2 megapixel depth camera, where you might see some difference, but that difference might not matter much. Now you can see these images both on the Nokia X30 and the Nokia G60 5G. The first image is captured through the standard night mode, and just observe this on the X30 first. When I go front and back on this image, can you see the differences here? You can see how much more beautiful the output is, and you can see how much better it contains the light that is being shown here. So again, the X30 night mode, this is the dark vision. Now this is what dark vision is supposed to be. Now just move on to the G60, the same thing. So we're going to go okay, so the first image is night mode. Second image is this is the second image. This is the using dark vision. So is there any differences that you can see? I would say that, like I said, just concentrate on the light here. This is how the light is on the standard night mode on both these devices. You can see that it fails to contain it, And once you go to the dark vision on the X30, you've got a much better containment of this. But when you go to the G60, once you do that, you can see it not only fails to contain the light, now you have it much more undefined here, along with more noise. Let's just move from that. You have more noise, you've got less details. Just have a look at this. So this is how the details are on the G60. Once you go to dark vision, and you can see how much less defined they are. So on the G60, it introduces more noise, less details, better containment of low light. So this is why I didn't want to argue further in my earlier tweets, because I was waiting for the X30 to actually make a final verdict. Now I do strongly think that the dark vision was intended to be as it is on the X30 and not what it is on the G60. You are not just supposed to see better, you should have a usable image, which definitely is seen on the X30 but not on the G60. Now thankfully this is something that is software dependent. I do hope that Nokia HMD Global takes notes of this and add the improvement, as both these devices are actually very good devices and they do deserve to get better treatment. So let's move on to the next image. Now this is one other sample that I would like to share. This is again night mode. Now for those of you who think that there is any presence of ambient light, no, this is actually a very dim scene. There's actually barely any lights other than the street lights, which is much further away. And practically, if you were to use the standard mode, you will not be able to see anything, probably just a couple of strands of the leaves, but nothing usable. But both the G60 and the X30 has been able to capture this, but you can see how much sharper the images are on the X30 compared to the G60 here, which makes it pretty usable. So if you think this is not interesting or not really an outstanding feature, take a look at this. Again, this is completely dark. Your naked eyes couldn't really make out the details much, but under the dark vision, now you have this. Again, you have details, you have colors, you've got vibrancy. Of course, on the G60, like I said, you can see more, but you won't be able to use it. A complete opposite on the X30, where you've got beautiful image. So this is what dark vision is meant to be. Now I'm just going to show you this. So this is the tripod mode. One question that was asked to me is that how much longer exposure time that you get with the X30, because the X30 has OIS. So now this is going to be a very interesting comparison between both this in a while, but I was able to get up to 50 seconds on the X30. On the G60 it was up to 48 seconds. I do not know the actual limit of the exposure time between both these devices, but it tends to max out at 48 for the G60, and I was able to get easily 50 seconds on the X30. Now this is again a completely dark situation. Whatever lights that you're seeing are actually reflections from the street light much further away, and things get interesting once you start to zoom in. Now the thing is, once it is completely dark, it's difficult to set a focus point, so I tend to let the camera itself to focus by itself as they capture, because it is a 48-second exposure and it goes into variable exposure, variable I think probably even variable focuses. It tries to capture different focus ranges and try to merge the image together. Now this is what I found out. Well, both the images are pretty much usable. The G60 surprisingly have the much better outcome here, so it is really surprising to see this. Now do take note that once the camera is in the tripod mode, there is no way for you to change any focus. It will just mess up the image. But if you were to just let the phone do its work, you would see that the G60 tends to have a slightly sharper image compared to the X30. Now if you really want to know how dark it was, let me show you. So this is the front facing camera, at night. This was how the scene looked like when I captured all these images under the dark vision. Now what I'm trying to say is that the G60's sensor is how is although it's able to capture some amount of details here, this is still much better than the other devices from Nokia before this. But the X30 simply does better. Now this is captured using the front facing camera. I did not on the illuminator, so you have a feel of how the sensors themselves perform. So the X30 does not only have a bright rear sensor, even the front sensor is much brighter by default, allowing you to capture a much usable image. Of course, you can have a much better front facing selfies if you activate the illuminator function on the G60. But this is just to show you how dark it was actually when I took all these images, and how the sensor on the X30 is inherently much brighter. So a couple more images. Let's see, we have something usable here. So I think we could discuss a bit about this. I don't have the same image here, but I'll just go to the next one. Now both these are late evening images using the standard photo mode, and you can see that again the X30 being able to capture much more details compared to the G60. Now like I told you earlier, under low light, or when the light gets less, then the G60 tends to have much more noise and much less detail compared to the X30, because the X30 sensor is inherently brighter. So of course you can have much better reproduction with the night mode on. This is just to show you how it functions under the standard mode. You can see how well defined things are on the X30 compared to the ones on the G60. So let's move on to the next one. So this is the ultra wide capture. Unfortunately, both these devices do not have a night mode for the ultra wide capture, unlike the Nokia 8.3. Now under the ultra wide capture, of course you're going to see that the X30 to generally have a much better outcome because it has a large 13 megapixel sensor. Now the thing is, both these devices use this new feature called Fusion, where it combines the image from the primary and also the 5 megapixel sensor on the G60, whereas on the X30 it combines the primary with the 13 megapixel ultra wide sensor to have a final output. This is similar to what the new Pixel 7 series device also use something similar for the ultra wide output. So I would say that of course the X30 would be the one with the better output here, because its primary sensor is combining with a 13 megapixel ultra wide sensor, whereas on the G60 it is a 5 megapixel. Now what I'm trying to say is that although it is just a 5 megapixel ultra wide sensor on the G60, it is definitely one of the best 5 megapixel ultra wide sensor out there. So it gives you a much better output than your standard 5 megapixel ultra wide sensor. So again, just to show you the ultra wide sensor on both these devices, so these are both captured through the ultra wide output. Now I would like to share with you the amount of details that you can actually capture thanks to the fusion technology that the new devices have. And you can see that despite zooming in very much deep into the image, the 5 megapixel, thanks to the fusion technology, has a very good center detail here. And you can see that both these devices capture adequate details. Of course the X30 has less noise, whereas you can see much more noise on the G60. But to think that this is actually coming from a 5 megapixel output, and then you'll tend to appreciate the new fusion feature that is being introduced. So if you zoom out, you can see how far these objects really are, and to capture that amount of details from a 5 megapixel sensor is something really remarkable. And the other thing is that I'm not really sure how the fusion works. I do think that the center of the image is somewhat fused with the primary sensor, but the periphery is still retaining the output from the ultra wide. So you tend to get a sharper center image, which is what we usually emphasize on, but the peripheries of the image gets less. So you can see this is probably belonging to the 5 megapixel sensor output. As you can see, as it goes from the center of the image to the periphery, you can see the image becoming much blurry. Whereas on the X30, image do get blurry, but it tends to be definitely sharper than the G60 thanks to the ultra wide output having a 13 megapixel sensor. Now I think this is the comparison between both these devices. Now just to share one final image on the low light capture. So this is just the night mode being tested out, and you can see how vibrant the colors are on the X30, which makes it an easy winner compared to the G60. You can see how much better it does have in terms of details, in terms of the containment of the lights. So definitely the X30 has a superior, and probably one that can even rival devices like Vivo X70, which I'll be testing much later on. But in essence, both these devices, they are somewhat redefining what HMD Global can do. So either of these devices would definitely be more than adequate, especially if you're looking for devices which are well rounded in all the aspects in terms of quality, reliability, battery life, and even the camera. Both these devices are actually quite good, and you can see there are some similarities, some differences. They do have their own strength and weakness, but in general both these devices has elevated the experience compared to any other Nokia devices that were made before this. So with that, I do hope that you enjoy this comparison video. I do hope that my opinions and my observation would help others to understand how both the camera work. So if you do like this video, do give a thumbs up. I would be comparing all the other PureView devices next. So if you have any specific request to test, I'll be testing out the 8.3, the Nokia 9 PureView, and the X30 next. So if you have any specific request, do let me know either in the comment section or in Twitter. So I hope to see you in the next one. Do take care, and thank you once again.